this video, we are going to be talking all things AI. What are the good AI to use, which are the bad ones to use and avoid as a teacher, and how you can spot if a student is using it, plus some essential safeguarding tips for your students. I'm joined today by Alex Moore, one of the experts in AI in education, who even does consultancy across so many schools for staff and SLT. So let's get into it. Okay, well, welcome Alex, and thank you so much for joining me today. I've been going through a series of sort of AI features because I have really enjoyed using AI, but I'm not an expert, and I've become more and more aware as I see people like you on LinkedIn that there is so much more I could know. So thank you for joining us. For anyone who might not have come across you before, could you give us a bit of an introduction into your background, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. So I've been a teacher for 22 years, mostly sports science, but I've taught everything in the curriculum, in the secondary curriculum, everything apart from modern foreign languages. So a bit of a polymath in terms of the subjects. And when you're a leader, for the last sort of 7 or 8 years, I've been a school leader and a trust leader looking at CPD and teacher development. So you kind of pick up whatever you're told you have to teach at the end of the day, whatever is left on the secondary timetable, you pick up a bit of this, a bit of that. So yeah, my background's teaching at secondary in the UK, and I've become a consultant in AI in the last sort of 12 months. So I spent a lot of time going around the country and sometimes globally, working with educators, teachers, leaders on ethical AI implementation, everything from teacher use to more recently strategic leader use, so how leaders can kind of grapple with this technology and almost domesticate it and work with it in a safe way.
That's so interesting because, I mean, I've been out of school now for just over 12 months. I was biology teacher, head of science, head of biology, and I was very much in 2022 when ChatGPT was the new thing. I was using it and I was sharing with staff ways to use it, and my SLT were very cautious and fearful of it, and it was very much, please don't use it because we don't understand it, so don't use it yet. So it's so good to hear that maybe things are changing, or maybe you're just with more open leaders, but to hear that it is coming from like the top down as well, seeing ways that it can be used. I guess the big thing is, how do you use it appropriately? So what sorts of things do you talk to schools about then with how they could use it?
Yeah, good question. So about a year ago, I'd agree with you. Schools were kind of saying this technology is going to go away, it's bad, we don't really understand it, we're going to ban it. That attitude of we don't understand it, so we'll ban it. But there's been a real shift in the last 3 to 6 months. I think when you see JCQ, Ofsted, and the exam board and the DFE starting to generate guidance around AI, you know that there's kind of a change in the air. And my experience now is that everyone's kind of welcoming it and looking at ways to embed it that's specific to their setting. And that really varies from massive academy trusts down to very small primary schools that might have 400 kids and sort of handful of teachers. So it's really kind of been accepted and required like input on ethics. So there's a lot more sort of a movement towards, well, how do we use this in the supervised environments like schools safely, but also how do we create responsible digital citizens that we can train and teach to use it responsibly outside of school, because that obviously is another area that kids are accessing AI in. So yeah, it's an interesting place to work at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some of the key tools then that would be useful for schools to be using in terms of AI?
A lot of it depends on what the setup is the school is. So for example, if they're a Microsoft school, they're probably going to have a Copilot license, and those licenses come in at all different levels. So a lot of the training I do is I go into schools and I train teachers, but also the non-teaching staff, so like the heads PA, admin, finance, HR, on how to sort of get workload efficiencies through Copilot, and there's loads of things you can do. You can create your own little agents now. So for example, I created an agent on Friday that scans hundreds of job CVs and letters. It's called the recruitment agent, and I've customized it to tell it what to do. I've given it instructions, given it a name, and I've run a few test trials on it and given it some prompts. So prompts are the things you add into the interface for large language model. And this thing truly believes that it is a recruitment coach and takes its job quite seriously. And it will scan CVs, and it doesn't take me out of the loop, but what it does is it just gives it another layer. So if I miss something, and I can put the rubric, what I'm looking for, like the job spec almost, on like an ideal candidate match criteria, and it will scan the CVs, it will scan the job letters, and it will give me a fairly accurate list of the top 10 candidates and the reasons why. So it's really good at that. And then you go for Google Schools. So the Google Schools obviously using Gemini. That's part of kind of what they're, because their whole ecosystem is Google. So they're interested in how you can use Google related products and some AI wrapper apps, which are not large language models. So just kind of for the audience, if you're not sure, large language models are the big models like OpenAI's ChatGPT. That's the one that most people in the world are using. It's the most popular one. And then you've got Google's Gemini, And then you have, obviously, Microsoft's Copilot. Where it gets interesting, though, right, is that Microsoft have like 49% shares in ChatGPT. So there's a little bit of crossover there. And I think you'll start to see a lot more of the products integrated. And then you've got Anthropic's Claude, which is a whole separate beast. We can talk about that later because it's a very ethical one. It doesn't train on data, and it's kind of the good guy, the good AI, if you like. So yeah, it's a really, and then you've got some naughty ones as well, like Grok. So that's Elon Musk's Twitter X. Grok is, and that's a pretty naughty in terms of the outputs you get and the way it's trained. And then you've got DeepSeek, which is from China, which people just don't know anything about because it's not very shared. So yeah, it's an interesting field. So just to kind of pivot back to your question, mostly I'll teach people how to use Copilot, Gemini, and ChatGPT. Most teachers and kids are using ChatGPT, so it's quite a universal one, but it's also one of the more problematic ones as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something you mentioned there, agents, which I don't use and I've heard a little bit about, but my understanding is probably not quite right. And I don't know how many of my followers will know. So my understanding is like I've used ChatGPT a lot and I have projects. So I'll put information in. So I've got like a GCSE biology project. So anything to do with that, I have that. But agents, is that slightly more automated then? So they can actually do a particular job automatically? Like what's the difference between them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's exactly what they do. So you can automate them to do a job. So I've got an ideas coach, I've got a prompt coach, I got a Key Stage 3 biology coach who creates me really good worksheets and adaptive teaching resources for Key Stage 3 biology. And I've trained it. So what you do is you can go into the agent setting. So the word agent, it kind of sounds like it's like secret agent, like yeah. It kind of, it's quite a contentious term. Some people don't like it. And what you'll find with AI is generally it just runs off metaphor, like most technologies. You know, we never see, do we? We never merely see what we see as. So we see it in the image of us. AI as a tool, as a brain, as a black box. And it's the same with agents. So agent's just a phrase that AI has stolen to mean a custom bot, essentially. Okay, so it's a customized bot. So what you can do is you can go and you create anyone. So you could create one to give you recipes for cooking. You could create one to help you with a child that has dyslexia, a child that has ASD, and you go in the customization button and you customize it. So you give it a name, so you can call it what you want to call it, and it will be known unless you edit it for that forevermore. And then once you need to tell a little bit about its character. So you know, like when you're doing a LinkedIn profile, you put Alex Moore is a leader, teacher, ed coach. So you do that and you give it like a bit of a prompt to tell it kind of what it is, so it understands what it is. So if you ask it what it is, it understands, right? It's really fun way to do things. And then you could ask it to describe itself to you, which it will do. I'll talk about that in a sec. And then you can give it really detailed kind of, I want you to speak like this. So I want you to be Gen Z, for example. I did that for a laugh the other day. And it was so funny. It was coming back like with all my responses, even my serious work was like really Gen Z. It had like Gen Z language. You can give it really like sharp shooting, professional, witty. And sometimes you almost need to give it a bit of your text. So here's an email I sent to someone. Take the names out. Mimic this tone. Use my vernacular and my words. And it'll do it. And then you train it. So these large language models have a memory. So they remember it, unless you turn it off, they remember your interactions with them. So they remember kind of what your preferences are and what you like and what not. And then it will start to personalize it. So then it will start to do its job and you can almost set it to work and send it off into the world. But I'll tell you a funny story on about like the fact that these AIs believe that are actually something. So there was a famous, so Anthropic's Claude created an AI to believe it was the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, right? So this AI genuinely believed it was the Golden Gate Bridge. And they were offering quite a lot of money if you could break it and convince it otherwise. So I had a good go, as did a lot of people. And asked it questions like, where could I go to eat on the Golden Gate Bridge? Now, luckily I've been to the Golden Gate Bridge. I know there's no restaurants there. Yeah. A lot of cars, but no restaurants. And it was like, you could take a picnic and you could eat and look over the Pacific, and then you could walk off on Ocean Beach and burn the calories. It's like, really clever type of technology. And then I was like, right, I'm going to break this thing. And I came up with a bunch of questions, couldn't do it. In the end, I was like, right, what does the Golden Gate Bridge have to do with the Rwandan genocide? I was thinking, right, I have it. And it was like doing that thing when it was thinking for ages. And I was like, this is it. I got the 10 grand prize. And then it came back up saying the Golden Gate Bridge divides the north and south of San Francisco. And the people of both sides don't like each other. And so there's conflict, which is obviously not true. It's an hallucination, but it was quite funny. I thought it made. Yeah. And it said the Rwandan genocide was about a division in culture and beliefs and stuff. And the people either side of the bridge may or may not have different beliefs. So the bridge separates them to avoid conflict, which I thought was like total nonsense, but also quite clever the way it kind of arrived at.
Yeah, oh my goodness. So if like for a teacher then, you were saying you can give it a whole character, could you give an agent basically just to be you? So I could say, you are a biology teacher of X number numbers of years, you teach this exam board, and you could do it for maybe one class. You teach year 11, they've got these grades, we've covered this much of the spec, here is the spec, and I want you to be there to create differentiated multiple choice questions for every lesson, like something like that then, and it could just suddenly take on that character.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to be careful with this whole sort of idea, because there's a lot of worry out there about teachers being automated by AI, like there is in all workflow, not just teaching, in all jobs. And there's a real narrative that the press spin that's quite dangerous, and I think we need as teachers and leaders to be really mindful of that and actually say that isn't the case.
Yeah.
My own research, I didn't mention at the start, but I'm doing my PhD, and I'm looking at student voice and agency and power and knowledge, looking kind of epistemology and how AI is changing increasingly like coin the AI epoch. And one of the things the kids said to me repeatedly in interviews is, we don't want AI teachers, we want human teachers. We really do. And I think that's really important. So yes, to a certain extent, I think we need to be clear that we can do all the stuff that you said, but it's not to replace the teacher. It's almost like to have a little alias, like have an extra teaching assistant where, and it's not to replace teaching assistants either, because they're invaluable. You know, the AI is not going to get to know the kids like we do. But what it can do is exactly what you said. You say, I want you to imagine that you're a biology specialist. Here's the national curriculum, upload it, or if you don't work for the national curriculum, whatever, here's a bunch of stuff that I'm going to be covering in the next month. And I want you to, pretend you're a biology teacher that teaches kids that are 11 to 14, and we're going to be looking at cells, we're going to be looking at respiration, whatever it is you're looking at. Please, could you create me some content, some ideas? Whatever you want to do with it is really good. 100%.
And I think that does lead into like a really interesting point around the ethics, that and like either misuse or misunderstanding of how it might be being used, because I definitely don't think, like you said, it should be there to replace teachers, and I don't think it could replace a teacher. You would get something that isn't quite right, but I do think there's so much worth in teachers using it to help, especially if it's like, oh, I've suddenly realised I've got this class and I read my timetable wrong, wasn't expecting it, or I thought we're at this lesson and we're not, I've got everything here, however I've remembered so-and-so's in the class and they're probably going to need an extra support activity that I don't have time to make in 5 minutes. So I think things like that could be helpful, but always completely checking what's being put out to make sure, does it actually suit your class, their needs, is it appropriate, and just making sure it's being used as an assistant, not a replacement. And I think it's important that the students are aware of that as well, because I've seen more and more of that come out now as students, because I've got my student-facing platform and my teacher-facing platform, so they see that I talk about AI to teachers. So sometimes they'll then comment to me and say, well, this isn't fair because we're not allowed to use AI, you should be allowed to use it. And it's an interesting one, because like, well, I agree there's certain uses that neither party should be using it for, but I also think there's certain things that both should be. So yeah, definitely a lot around the ethics. Do you do any like training around the ethics when you are going in to help the schools?
Yeah, loads. Interestingly, I was just talking about this morning, and I was doing some training yesterday and Friday, just to kind of, so I work as a consultant for STEM learning as well. Obviously, we're a primary biology STEM podcast, so you're going to have a lot of biology teachers and people interested in biology. And one of the courses that I wrote for STEM learning, co-wrote with Dave Gibbs, is called Unlocking AI. It's hugely popular. It's 4 90-minute modules, and so 6 hours. And by the end of that 6 hours, teachers are empowered to go and lead AI in their setting and their map, which is really fun. But there was a huge interest in ethics specifically, so only one of those modules is on ethics, and we look at safe and reliable use of AI. And we look at everything from GDPR to safeguarding, synthetic intimacy, all this kind of scary stuff. And the interest was so high, we actually created a course that we're about to run for the first time in December that is ethics in AI for STEM learning. So that kind of is a course that people can do, but that I wrote with Simon Roberts, and we are offering that for first teaching. And it's a cost-effective way to get people to sort of engage with the ethical issues, because there's loads. There's absolutely loads, depending on the age and the stage, how they're using AI at home, at school. Things like synthetic intimacy just open a whole can of worms. So that's when kids or adults could be intimate with a device and start disclosing some fairly intimate details, which is obviously really worrying from a safeguarding point of view. And also, like, I do some work with the Good Future Foundation, who do incredible work in that space. And And they did a collab actually with STEM Learning where we got together a group of primary and secondary school teachers, and we ran AI focus groups, and we really unpicked the things that they're worried about with ethics. And you're kind of right. In the primary setting, it's more about kind of keeping the kids safe, teaching them to be good, responsible digital citizens and age-appropriate content. But then at the secondary setting, it's more about the synthetic relationships and some of the worries and anxieties around plagiarism, using it to, you mentioned this, using it to kind of do AI-generated work. So it's a really, really topical thing. And yes, I do offer a lot of consultancy around that. And increasingly people are wanting guidance on it because it's a bit of a minefield. And that can link to policy, or it can be specific to kind of the day-to-day pedagogy within schools.
Yeah. I wonder how many schools actually have an AI policy now, because I don't think, like I said, I left a year ago now, but I don't think my school had an AI policy. They started to talk about UCAS's policy, because I had a sixth form as well. So they were very big on, you need to make sure you're not using AI to write your personal statements. But then it's like, well, how can they actually tell? Because I've now seen people like putting in their prompts as well and make sure no one can tell that I've used AI to do this and it doesn't look like it's plagiarized or anything. So how would you even tell if you have been given, let's say you're a teacher, you've got a piece of work, are there any like key things that you would look for to be able to tell if a student might have used AI?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some real giveaways. So AI loves, in English grammatical terms, it's called the rule of three, or the power of three, where you finish a sentence with three words. So I could be like, I could be like, for example, I love working in AI because it's empowering, rewarding, and enriching. Yeah, so you put three verbs or whatever at the end of a sentence. AI is really good at that. And that really annoyed me when it started doing it, because that's one of my writing styles. So when I write stuff, I think the power of three is a really good thing. So it's kind of trained and it does that. Then other things is it loves a hyphen. There's nothing wrong with a hyphen, but if you look at a lot of AI-generated content, it'll actually connect the hyphen directly to the last letter of the word. So if it was like and, the hyphen would be attached to the D. There'd be no gap in between, and it's almost slightly longer, whereas a real hyphen is supposed to signify like a pause or a comma, like a gap, one bit of information to the next. So there'll be space either side of it. And I think that's a real telltale sign. And then it loves three words, right? And again, I'm gutted because I used to use these. Leveraging, the amount of times I see leverage. I don't even use it anymore for that reason. Leveraging, empowering, and harnessing. So it absolutely loves. Occasionally it will chuck in fostering if you're using Gemini. But those four are just off limits now for me because they are AI really latched onto them. So, and the biggest thing of all is like, I don't know if in biology how much extended writing there is, but in coursework, in things like history and sociology, you can just tell if it's generated by a kid. Compare it to a year ago, were they writing like this? Probably not. Have they suddenly won the Booker Prize? No. So like, where's this coming from? So there's that point as well.
Did you see that episode on Educating Yorkshire where they were talking about a student that they thought had used AI, and it was exactly the same thing? I think it was for her English, and the teacher went to the teacher from last year and was like, what was she like at English last year? Because she's just submitted this and it's so much better than anything she's ever done, but it's such a difficult situation to be able to then go to the student. I suppose it's no different to saying, I think you've cheated on your homework before AI, whatever it might have been. But it's coming up and how you can prove it. And in the end, they couldn't prove it, even though it looks like pretty much they definitely had. I've had that as well. So for, like you say, for biology extended writing, we in A-level have an essay. So they have to write a 25-mark essay. But it's not like your traditional essay. You don't have an introduction. You don't have a conclusion. It's more just like 4 standalone paragraphs. And it's quite unique in its style. And I actually started to try and get different AIs to write it to see how good they can be, to see if students would be able to replicate it using this. And it was awful. No matter what I told, I said, here's the mark scheme, here's a model paragraph that would get you full marks. It still couldn't do the correct style. And I actually then noticed when students were handing it in, I was like, well, this is clearly ChatGPT's work here because it's not following any of the guidelines and the biology is so much better than yours. So there's definitely ways that you can tell.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, like, to talk to your point about the plagiarism, like what I see a lot, and it's quite a dangerous thing really, because it destroys trust, particularly from a kid's point of view, is the accusation of using ChatGPT. And my own daughter's been on the receiving end of this. She's doing the IB, and there's a lot of essay-based subjects on the IB, like global politics, ESS. You'd like that one actually, environmental systems and science. It's got like a biology background, really interesting.
Oh, nice.
And her friends sometimes get accused because it's difficult. And what it can do really quickly is it can erode trust. It can destroy a relationship with the kid, because you're essentially, and if they haven't done it, if it is genuinely their work, that's when it's really difficult. And I often get asked, Alex, what should you do in this situation? The ideal thing is to sit them down and ask them to speak you through it. But I appreciate that, to prove it's their work. But busy school day, 30 kids in a class, 5 hours a day, not always possible. So what we're looking at increasingly is like what we call AI spot checks, which is when essentially a teacher will call out different parts of a piece of work and say, who recognises that? And if the kid is theirs, they'll be like, that's my work, well done. If they just keep their hand down, it's like, did they realise it's theirs? And have they looked at what it kind of generates? And it's so contentious, because on the other side of that, a whole lot of my work is helping teachers with AI to write responses to passive aggressive emails from parents, or and on the flip side, to debug some AI written emails from parents as well that come in, and they're clearly used by so it's an interesting field at the moment, and it's moving fast, and no one really has a clear steer, so there's a lot of ambiguity and questions around it.
What advice then would you give teachers? Because you said that you've got the other side of things where you do give advice for teachers to use AI. If someone is completely new to it, what would you say would be maybe like top 3 basic uses that might help them, which is like an appropriate use?
Yeah, good question. So I think, like, in terms of how teachers should think about AI, there's somebody called Laura Knight who is fantastic in the AI sphere, one of my favourite sort of AI speakers. And Laura says, think with care. And this isn't necessarily what teachers should do, but it's what they should embody as their kind of mantra when it comes to AI. Professor Rose Luckin sort of says, learn fast but think slow, so be deliberate in how you think about these technologies. In terms of 3 things, the obvious one is the workload reduction, but I want to kind of play devil's advocate here, because I was literally just training a bunch of leaders yesterday on one of the problems with this is, you mentioned the cover situation or adapting a PowerPoint on the fly. When I was in schools, I left teaching this summer to be a consultant, but when I was in schools, I was a senior leader. And quite often the cover guy would be like, hey, we need you to do a cover lesson in 5 minutes because someone's gone home. And I know it's your PPA, but you're a senior leader, so just get on with it type thing. And it's year 8 physics down the corridor, that class. It's that class. And you're doing forces, and that's all I know. I'm sorry, Alex, off you go. So I'd use a tool like Gamma, right, which is an AI wrapper app, GAMMA. And I would punch in, write me a PowerPoint deck and some notes on forces. And it would do a relatively good job of telling me about, Newton's 3 laws and give me some examples. But when you really look at the output of that, and this is interesting, so when you look at what it's generating, aesthetically it looks beautiful. Like the slides are way better than anything I could have created, unless I had hours. But the content is problematic. There's troublesome knowledge in there. And the worst thing of all, as well, is that all the images are of boys. So it's really sexist. Yeah, 100%. So there's somebody called Victoria Headland. She's called the Bias Girl. She's not a girl, she's a woman. And she does some amazing work on bias. And I think if you invite her on the podcast, she'd be a good guest, because she speaks really to this from an expert's lens. But what it does is it will generate you kind of, the boys will be powerful and creative and dynamic, and there'll be cars and rockets and explosions and power, okay? Whereas the girls will be sparkles and fairy dust. And there won't be any girls at all in my AI forces. There'll all be guys, Equally, if I just put into a large language model and list me the top 10 scientists of all time, if Marie Curie will be the only one that makes the list, who's female, the rest will all be male. Sometimes Ada Lovelace gets a look in, sometimes. And all of these things that are kind of baked into my AI slideshow that I then go and show the kids, right? So that's one side of it, which is really problematic, because which voices are being hidden in that discussion? Well, loads, and I'm just using it as a time-saving hack. On the other side of this, what leaders are worried about, and I work with a lot of leaders on this, is imagine you've got an ECT. So for those listening, early career teacher used to be at NQT,
newly qualified.
And obviously the government have done that to get more teachers to stay in teaching, 2-year sort of probation period. Not a probation period, entry period.
Probation.
Not at all.
Feels like it.
It shouldn't do. But, and these teachers sometimes are exhausted, and sometimes they have conversations with their mentors like, I want to leave the profession because of X, Y, and Z. I'm spending my evenings planning. And it can be a really attractive prospect to go, right, I'm just going to use Gamma.app or an app like that to create lesson plans. But then if they're not a subject expert in the first place, or their biology knowledge is weak because they're quite early in their career, we start to see some real problems here, because if they're just offsetting to AI, who's checking the outputs? Who's checking the validity of the knowledge? Do they have the experience? And in your subject set, I know this through STEM learning, there are massive amounts of non-specialist teachers, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly in physics,
I'd
right?
say especially in physics, yeah.
Yeah. So what is then happening is AI is almost weakening that need to build knowledge and epistemology by giving them a solution and a get out of jail free card. So there's leaders are worried about that as well.
Yeah, very interesting. That's the first time I've heard about that in terms of the bias involved. So that's a very interesting one, because it's a whole other consideration linked to it. So yeah, definitely I'll look into that next as well. Earlier on, you were mentioning Claude. So Claude, tell us about Claude then.
Okay, so most of the large language models, so LLMs, large language models, they're the interfaces that you're typing into when you interact with an artificial intelligence, an AI, okay? And they're all based in Silicon Valley, which is out in the West Coast, California. And about a few years back, so the biggest one we spoke about is OpenAI, okay?
Yeah.
They're quite an unethical company, and I can say this because I'm representing myself today, nobody else. In as much as they don't tell you how or when and what data they train on. So the training of the data is very black box, it's very sealed off, we don't get any access to that. So that's my first kind of contention with them. The second thing is that they are aggressively charging towards AGI, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. Now, this is the next big landmark moment. You could almost put it on a spear with creating a cure for cancer. It's a real thing of marker of human progress that AI agents want to try and achieve, if that makes sense. Now, what that would mean is, and we're going to borrow some terms from biology and psychology here, but sentience and consciousness. Alan Turing, who's a mathematician, obviously a code breaker, came up with a thing called the Turing test, which is basically if you have an AI and a person and a mediator, and the AI can convince the mediator that it's human, then it passes the Turing test. And at that point, we're in trouble, because AI can start to replicate and mimic human behaviors at scale, if that makes sense, okay? So the issue, I guess, is that OpenAI and Google are a really aggressive race to get to AGI, because they want to be there first. And they're making rapid strides. So before we came on, you mentioned you spoke to John Dolman, and he was talking about Notebook LM. Notebook LM is a Google product, and it's pretty impressive because you can upload a PDF and turn it into a podcast, and two hosts will speak about your podcast, right? Or let's say that you wrote a book chapter, for argument's sake, and you think it's great.
Yeah.
So you upload it as a PDF, and these two podcast guests do a 15, 20-minute podcast about your book. And for the most part, they make it sound really great, like you're a Booker Prize winner and you're fantastic. And what it's doing is it's glazing you. So there's a phrase for this in AI circles called glazing. And it's being sycophantic and complimentary to you on purpose. But why do you think it's doing that?
Because it wants you to keep using it?
Why?
Because it gets more information from you, I guess.
Yeah, and hopefully it gets you to upgrade to the paid plan, which is 20 quid a month, right? So it's going to be naturally quite sycophantic towards you. And that's problematic with kids, because that's when these kind of relationships build. Yeah. But also, I'm just not really on board with an AI company that has that direction of travel. So this is my long way of saying Claude's different. So Claude used to work, so Claude, not person, Claude's a large language model. The company is called Anthropic, taken from the Anthropocene, another biological sort of epoch, or geological. And what they did is they splintered away from AI. They were like, hang on, we're not happy with this aggressive march towards AGI, so we're going to jump off the bus, and we're going to go and create and raise a lot of money and create our own artificial intelligence company, and we're going to be called Claude, and we're going to be more cautious. We're not going to march towards AGI. We're not going to train on people's data, and we're going to try and do the right thing. And my opinion is they've done a good job. They've still got some issues, because there's this weird movement out in Silicon Valley called altruism. Do you know what this is?
Not in terms of AI, no.
So altruism is like, well, you've always got to do good for everyone else, and you've got to invest in charities and be seen on the surface to be doing really good things with all your masses of billions, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So they're quite altruistic, and sometimes that can come across quite, I'm going to be really candid here, like white privilege, almost like, and you can edit this part out of the podcast if it's too contentious, but yeah, kind of like we've got all this power and leverage, so we're going to do some tokenistic gestures. Yeah. But on the whole, these guys are pretty good, and they don't train on data. So I like Claude, because if you look at, and I know that John, the AI English teacher, likes Claude, because if you look at the outputs, the vernacular and the language is more sort of robust. even on the free version, you can pay for a version. So I actually quite like Claude, and I use Claude quite often as a research companion. So if I'm looking at Paolo Freire, I'll be like, I heard he said this. Like, one of my favourite phrases is education is an act of love, but it's not from Pedagogy of the Oppressor. What book is it from? Because I'd like to read more. And it will really triangulate, like Perplexity will do, and find you some really good avenues into the research. So it's a really good tool. Does that answer your question, I think, in a long-winded way?
Yeah, so does it have the same features then? Because this was a while ago, I was told that Claude was really good more for writing purposes, whereas ChatGPT might be better, or not better, but it has other applications as well, whereas Claude is good for the writing side of things.
Claude's great for writing. I'd say it's the best one for writing, if I'm honest. It's also really good for code. What it can't do is generate you an image. So if you want to create a picture, it can't do that. You need to go to the other ones. You can upload up to 10 documents a day on the free version, and it could, for example, let's say that you had a department meeting, you could upload your notes to that and get it to annotate it just like the others. It would do that, and it's good for that. But the writing is the best. I feel the language they use, and it's probably the best one for me. Unless you're really good at customizing your GPTs, it's probably the best one.
So what are the main ones that you use? 'Cause I'm sure you use lots of different, and I never know what the term is for this. Would it be language model or AI or platform? I don't know. But what are the key ones that you use regularly?
So in my sort of consultancy role, I get asked to do a lot of work with Microsoft's Copilot, because a lot of schools have a Copilot license, so it makes sense, okay? So I use that a lot. I also use ChatGPT all the time, like for my own personal work. And I use my phone here. So on ChatGPT, there's like a voice mode, and I've got a little character that speaks back to me, and sometimes I riff with them and say, like, I'm in London, in Islington, I don't know where to eat, give me some top tips, I fancy like some Mexican, whatever, and it does that, and it's really good for that. So I use ChatGPT personally a lot, and I probably 70% of my work is in ChatGPT. I've got a paid license. I use Claude too. I do use Gemini, but only when I'm asked to. I don't like Gemini as a model, and I know people will take issue with that because some people love it, but for me, it's the one that hallucinates the most. And I don't use it that much. And I certainly don't use DeepSeek or Grok, but I have played around with them.
Yeah, I think I need to have a look at Claude, because I have only ever used ChatGPT. I've heard of Claude, but I didn't use it. I've just now got a couple of others after talking to John yesterday. And I've had a little, after we first spoke, I played around with Copilot and Gemini a little bit as well. But yeah, so many things out there. And very interesting to know that a lot of schools are actually buying licenses so staff can use it in different ways in school. But hopefully we'll start to see more and more training. And like you said, you're offering it with, you've got the courses that created on STEM learning already, and another one specifically linked to ethics. So that's the sort of thing that a lot of teachers are wanting, and therefore I'm sure they'll be requesting for their CPD in school. So hopefully teachers are going to get more and more advice, because it's a huge, huge remit out there. And I used to feel like I knew a fair bit about it until I started talking to people like you, and I was like, I know nothing here. So people who don't know have any idea at all. There's so much to learn. It is really overwhelming, which is why I only stuck to ChatGPT, because I don't have the capacity right now to get my head around anything else. But the more I hear about, like you were saying, what was it you were saying? AI, is like the generative that they're racing for. What was that term?
AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is different to Gen AI. Generative intelligence is anything. So Gen AI is what we're talking about. So large language models generate image, text, audio, code, sound, video. They generate something, whereas artificial general intelligence is that kind of, Ray Kurzweil called it the singularity moment, where human intelligence is surpassed. And you might argue in some domains it is, because it can do stuff quicker and more effectively than some humans in some domains. But then so did the calculator. So it's not the first time. It's not the first time we've been in this position.
Exactly. Interesting.
And I think it's interesting. Like, I think your audience would be interested to maybe know about the wrapper apps. So the large language models are the ones we just spoke about. Wrapper apps are like the AI that wraps around large language models. So I do a lot of work with TeachMate AI. Because I think Yeah, they're the most ethical, and they're British based, and they just got a really great product. So I endorse that to a lot of schools. And if you haven't come across TeachMate AI, seek them out and have a go, because they've got version 2.0 that came out this month, and it's just next level. So I can update the national curriculum in there, and I can refine it, and I can tweak it, and it's just, for me, it just works really, really well. So that's a good one. You mentioned Notebook LM, didn't you, for
yes.
the podcast? Another one that's great for teachers to use is Napkin AI, because what you can do with Napkin is you can copy and paste like a whole document. So let's say that, do you say you used to be a head of science?
Yeah.
And in that role, you probably had to do a data analysis to your senior management or governors or the CEO of the trust or whatever. What you can do in Napkin is you can copy and paste all that data in, and you can almost get ChatGPT or Claude to do the analysis on it, and then chuck it into Napkin. And then you highlight a section of text, and there's a little blue lightning bolt, and you click on it, and it brings up all of these infographics. So it turns your metrics, like 11% of girls underperformed compared to last year, for example, and it will create an infographic into the text. So when you're doing reports and stuff, it just looks amazing.
I was going to say, I'm sure I've heard of it, and that's because about a year ago I did try this out because I heard someone else speaking about it. I think I used it for create a load of graphics for an Instagram post about the 2024 grade boundaries and the number of students that were hitting different grades. And I was like, oh, look at this, it's amazing. It's making things far more engaging visually than I would have been able to make, or at least, like you said earlier, it can do it a lot quicker than I would have been able to do to get that. So yeah, that's a really good one. Like I said, for anyone who's having to present data, that's great. Yeah, Napkin.
Yeah, Napkin's decent. And it's also good for like parents. So not as a parent yourself, but for parent, like if you're doing like my daughter's doing GCSEs, my other daughter's doing GCSEs this summer, and the school's really good at communicating loads of like revision guides and prompts to parents. And it would be really good for that, because you could send out like top tips of the week, and you could almost put like that kind of infographic, that sort of dual coding aspect in there, which is great, isn't it? So
yeah, no, that is really good, because yeah, again, if it's more engaging, more likely to read it, and therefore the message you're trying to get across is actually going to be taken on. So yeah, excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today. There's so many things I need to process, and I was actually using the new AI transcriptor for this session, so I can use that, although I think it timed out halfway through because we've been chatting for so long and I'm on the free version.
But, you get half an hour, that's it.
But thank you so much. That was really helpful for me, and whenever I think, well, this was helpful for me, I know it's definitely going to be helpful for anyone listening. If people did want to find out a bit more about how you can help them, where could they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll share my link. I've got a link tree that links to my blog. I write quite a lot about the stuff we've been talking about, and mostly LinkedIn and email. So I'll send that details through to you. And one of the things I always mention, because it's free, and I think this is so useful for teachers and leaders in schools. There's an organisation called the Good Future Foundation. They're not on your radar yet. Seek them out. Okay. And they do something called the AI Quality Mark, and you can get a little badge for your school for bronze, silver, and gold. And it's got like a framework for teachers. So you mentioned that quite a few teachers don't know where to get started with AI. Yeah. It's kind of got like a checklist of stuff that you work through, and then you submit it, and you get like a person like myself to come and assess it and give you feedback. And it doesn't cost a penny. It's totally free. Wow. A lot of this stuff, like these apps and stuff, will cost you money down the road, but this one's free. So I'll ping you a link to that too.
Yeah, brilliant.
And yeah, like the STEM learning stuff, I'll send you links to that if people want to book on the courses. And I do run a lot of consultancy for trust schools up and down the country on ethics, AI, implementation, adaptive teaching, even to the point where like we're quite sort of bespoke things. A school the other day were like, we want to use AI to rewrite our EHCPs. So okay, cool, we can do projects like that. So I assume you have like links in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll put it all in the show notes and YouTube description. So if anyone does need to find any of these or wants to find out more, I'll link all of those for anyone that would like them. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for having me.
I hope you found that just as helpful as I did. There was so much key information there that I'm definitely going to take away and implement in my practice, and hopefully you can too. If you want access to anything we talked about, I'll link it in the description below. But that is it for this week.